Well, what to say, this is one of the weirdest and coolest case experiences I've had in a while. Not from like receiving the package and just figuring out exactly what the hell did I receive. I thought there was no case in the box at all because the box itself is super thin. As you can see, I can stash away the 3 boxes that come inside the main box in my bookshelf, and they can camouflage perfectly well in there. You build it yourself. It's kind of a DIY, almost feels like a high school project on its own, but I'm glad that in the end, as you can see, it does have a sort of a premium, unique appeal too. So this is the computer-1 from Teenage Engineering at 195 euros. You want to have some disposable income because it doesn't do anything special in terms of hardware support, in terms of cooling versus anything else that's available in the ITX market. It does look very cool. You build it yourself, you bend it yourself, and Teenage Engineering are known for quirky products in the first place with their synthesizers, their speakers, their other sort of accessories around that space. So for them to release a case that is this makes perfect sense. So let's review right after this.
Say hello to gorgeous illumination and silent performance with the new light wings from Be Quiet. Available in 2 sizes, high speed or standard versions with a very pretty circular diffusion to display RGB illumination. The 3-pack also comes with a hub and controlled via your motherboard. Check them out below.
So there is a pretty substantial DIY component with the computer-1. So everything comes disassembled. Your sheet metal, your front panel connectors, the buttons, the cables, all the little tools that you will need for assembling this thing. So the screws, the feet, the handles. I love their slogan of think twice, bend once. This is the right approach to doing something DIY. Although if you do make a mistake in the bending procedure, you can go back, and it's exactly what I did. In my first bend through, I went exactly the opposite way of how it's supposed to be done. I had to flatten it out and then bend it again, and there were no issues. Now the instructions manual is pretty straightforward. It's very clearly laid out. It's kind of like the IKEA of instructions manual for PC cases. But I would say the pro tip that is in the very end here should be in the very beginning of pre-tapping all the holes with a screw to make screwing all the panels back in place much easier, because otherwise you have to force them through, and it's much easier when the thread is already there. Now in terms of hardware compatibility, you can do an ITX motherboard, SFX power supply, and a dual slot GPU up to 180mm in length. So good luck finding one in the first place. So I would say this is mainly targeted towards a single CPU type of system only, with an integrated GPU of course in there somewhere, because even my ITX SFF version of an RTX 2060 is too long for this enclosure. The good thing, however, is that we have plenty of space for our CPU tower heatsink, so up to 120mm, which is plenty, and I would recommend using a downdraft cooler here because of how the case is designed and where you can mount that optional 80mm fan on the side to deliver some cool air. So here are the 6 panels that you will have to bend in order to assemble the computer-1. I do appreciate that we have some room for air, so it is forgiving in case you bend it the wrong way. To be honest, it's unlike anything I've experienced before, in both a good way because it's so unique and fresh, but also in a bad way when, you know, things are not aligning properly and you have to sort of bend the sheet metal a bit more to get it to where you want it to go. To make sure all your angles are at 90 degrees, make sure to use a hard surface and a corner to achieve this. The power button is very easy to install. You just have to make sure it doesn't protrude too much from the base plate, because there will be a separate plate that will go on top of that, and you don't want that to be sticking out and be uneven versus the opposite side. When it comes to piecing together the different sides of the enclosure, take your time. The case is not going to run away anywhere, and make sure to pre-tap all the mounting locations to make the installation much easier. In this stage of the assembly, I would recommend you take care of your cable management, just because later on it won't be as accessible, and as you'll see, like removing the side panel does require 10 screws, so it's not as easy as if you were to sort of do it beforehand. And then I took my time with the rest of the things. So mounting the USB-C front panel connector, it is a USB 3, but in the end, this is basically the components inside the enclosure. As you can see, it's a very small, compact case, but still can accommodate an ITX motherboard, no problem. A nice cooler in there as well, and the power supply is nicely tucked underneath at the bottom. but also because I'm not using a GPU, I only have 2 cables to worry about, so the 24-pin cable and the 8-pin CPU cable. Cable management here is probably the easiest thing to do. The hardest thing to do is the assembly and just like making sure everything aligns and where it needs to go. Keep in mind is that the case does not come with the 80mm fan that you can install on the side, which I find really strange. And it also doesn't come with the appropriate length of screws to mount a set, 25mm fan on the side there. So I have an Noctua 80mm fan, and I had to just find appropriate length screws and nuts to secure this thing. But in the end, it looks pretty decent. By the way, here's a banana for scale. This is truly an ITX focused enclosure, which is super compact. I love it. The top handles feel robust, and because the aluminum case is so light, plus we have so few components inside, I have total confidence in these handles and just carrying this thing around. What impressed me the most when I finished the assembly process is just how everything looks like it was meant to be. Nothing feels bent out of place, and I do appreciate the fact that even the front panel opening here has this like beautiful 90-degree angle on all corners, and that is because once you put everything together, it kind of seals all those joints, and it's like nice solid unit. The side fan, of course, is exposed, so careful not to put your fingers in there. And if you're not using a fan there, it's gonna look a little out of place because it's just gonna be a hole that you can see your CPU cooler through. Now, temperature-wise, this isn't really apples to apples because we have no GPU that outputs heat into the enclosure like I have with all other cases in this stack, but this is a really good result for such a cooler, and of course we have that additional 80mm fan on the side to give us additional fresh air. In the end, once you put this thing on your desk, my gosh, it looks different. It's definitely a conversation starter. I would not mind using it as my HTPC for media playback, for example. The only thing is that you really have to know what you're getting in terms of the DIY components, some frustration, nice little woohoo moment once it's all assembled and put together and this thing powers on. It is very quiet too, depending on what type of cooler and fan configuration you use. But of course, it's going to attract a specific type of ITX user who probably doesn't really care about computers at all. They just want something that looks this cool. So at 195 euros, would you be interested in something like this? Let me know in the comments. I am genuinely interested. It is not often we see an ITX enclosure that has so few things going for it, but it's exactly the attractive point for the computer-1 in my opinion. So I'm Dmitry, thanks so much for watching. Check out this other relevant content, subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you in the next video.